Hey third graders, today is Module 5, Lesson 23 or 23/30ths of the way through our unit. Today's lesson is exactly the same as yesterday's lesson as far as the learning goal goes. So once again, our learning goal is to generate simple equivalent fractions by using visual fraction models and the number line. Today we're going to be focusing more on that number line part. Let's get started. On your notes, please draw two number lines the exact same length long, both going from 0 to 1. Now that you have both of your number lines drawn, the purpose of today's lesson is for you to see where equivalent fractions are by using a number line. So on our top number line, I'd like you guys to draw it divided up into halves and label your halves. On your bottom number line, I'd like you guys to segment it into fourths. Go ahead and do that. Press pause and press play when you're done. All right, so your top number line you should have divided into half, the best that you could. And then we should label this 0 halves, 1 halves, and 2 halves, or 1 whole. I know that I've labeled my number line correctly because once I got to 1 whole, I had 2 halves. And I know that when the numerator and denominator match, then I've gotten to a whole number. For our first whole number, our first 1 whole. So I know that I've spaced them correctly. All right, now for your fourths, did you guys remember that fourths, first you cut your whole into half, and then you cut each half of your whole into another half, and that makes your fourths. And now let's go ahead and label them. I'm going to label them on the bottom because I didn't give myself much room. So I have 0 fourths, 1 fourth, 2 fourths, 3 fourths, 4 fourths, or 1 whole. So I know I did it right because my numerator matches my denominator. All right. The purpose of today's lesson is for you to see where equivalent fractions are on the number line. So you guys just made a tool for yourself to figure out an equivalent fraction. So using that, do you see any equivalent fractions on this number line? I see 3 that you could think of. What do you think? The first equivalent fraction that I see is that 1 half and 2 fourths are the same amount on the number line. They're the same distance from 0, and they're worth the same amount. So if I was to take my piece of paper and make sure that they're lined up, they would line up. So I know that if I had little owl at 1 half, and if I had little frog at 2 fourths, they would be the same distance away from 0. Yay! So we could write that as 1 half equals 2 fourths. So if your brother says, do you want 1 half of this muffin or do you want 2 fourths of this muffin? You can say, oh brother, you're so silly, it's the same amount. What's another equivalent fraction that you see? What about our zeros? I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. So 0 halves and 0 fourths. If your brother says, do you want 0 halves of my muffin or 0 fourths? You'll say, that's mean. You're supposed to give me some. That's nothing. What's another equivalent fraction that you guys see? What about our whole numbers? So our ones line up. So we have 2 halves is the same as 4 fourths, which both of them equal 1 whole. And I guess both of these equal 0. Okay, let's try another one. This time when you guys make your number lines, I'd like you guys to divide your first number line up into thirds and your second number line into sixths. All right, so to divide it into thirds, I know that my halfway point is about here. So, and I know that a third is less than a half. So when I draw it, I know that it's a little bit less than a half. And I know that my 2/3 is at a little bit more than a half. So that's pretty good for just drawing it by hand without a ruler. And then I know that my 6ths are just thirds cut in half. So I'm going to make my thirds again, and I'm going to try to line them up as closely as I can. And maybe we're going to fix that a little bit. And then I'm going to cut each of my 6ths in half. Okay, now I'm going to label them. Again, I know that I labeled my number lines correctly because when I got to 1 whole, I had 3/3, and when I got to 1 whole here, I had 6/6. So I know that I'm on the right track labeling my number line and how I divided it. What equivalent fractions do you guys see on here? What fractions line up? Go ahead and find all the ones that you can and write them below the 2 number lines. Press pause and press play when you're done. I notice here that 1/3 lines up perfectly with 2/6. So 1/3 equals 2/6. Another one that I see is 2/3 and 4/6. They line up perfectly. They're the same distance from 0. And I see my wholes. I see 3/3 and 6/6. And I see 0/6 and 0/3. Are also equivalent. So how did you guys do? I'm hoping that you guys at least noticed these ones right here, and then you noticed the end ones. Let's try another. Draw 2 more number lines exactly the same length. Divide the first into 4ths and the second one into 8ths. And then find all of the equivalent fractions that you can by using your number lines. Press pause and press play when you're done. All right, so your number lines should look like this. Your first number line you should have divided into 4ths. Remember, 4ths again are half, or where you divide your number line into half. And then each half of the whole you cut into half again, and then that gives you 4 equal pieces. You should have done your 4ths again down here, and I made the marks in blue so that you could see that all I did was after I had my 4ths, I cut each 4th in half, and that made my 8ths. Then my equivalent fractions, there were quite a few, so I had 0/4 and 0/8, 1/4 and 2/8, 2/4 and 4/8, 3/4 and 6/8, 4/4 and 8/8. How did you guys do? Your final problem tonight is to find which equivalent fractions there are with halves and 8ths. Go ahead and fill out your 2 exact same number lines by dividing them into halves and 8ths, and then write your equivalent fractions underneath. All right, you guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully this is starting to make a little bit more sense to you guys. Good night.